We also welcome our online viewers. And for that reason, in the question answer session, please, if you can stand up and ask your question, you will be visible on the online channels as well, and that makes things good for everyone. Welcome to the 15th edition of Jaipur Literature Festival, protected by Dettol Banega Swasth India at Bank of Baroda, Mughal Tent. We are delighted to introduce A Death in Shonagachhi. This session is presented by Amar Ujala. Rijula Das's engrossing literary debut is a story of the oldest profession and the lives, dreams, dangers, and misadventures born in the red light district of Shonagachhi. Ruthless as it is tender, A Death in Shonagachhi reveals the catacombs of societal divisions and the impediments to dignity, love, and humanity. Following many years of research on sexual violence and its connections with public spaces, Das discusses her unblinking novel based in Calcutta's most fabled, Shonagachhi, in conversation with Kanishka Gupta. Rijula Das's maiden novel, which is the one I'm mentioning, won the Tata Lit Live First Book Award and was longlisted for the JCB Prize in 2021. It is forthcoming as Small Deaths in the USA and the world in June 2022 by Amazon Crossing. Das is a recipient of the 2019 Michael King Writers Center residency in Auckland and the 2016 Dastan Award for her short story, Notes from a Passing. Her short story, The Grave of the Heart Eater, was longlisted for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize in 2019. Kanishka is a literary agent, writer, and publishing commentator, best known for his hugely acclaimed series for Scroll.in called Publishing and the Pandemic. He is the founder of Writer's Site, the largest literary agency and consultancy in South Asia. Kanishka has been credited for single-handedly popularizing literary representation in the subcontinent. His first novel was longlisted for the Asian Booker Prize in 2009 and was published in 2010. Give a hand to both the... Over to you guys.
So Rijula, this is your first JLF. So how has it been so far?
Thanks, Kanishka. It's my first JLF. Yes, it's amazing. It's more than I could have expected. It's completely unpredictable, but also overwhelming and quite relentless. So I've lost my voice. I'm sorry. Apparently, this is something that happens at JLF every year, but I didn't know that I was going to lose my voice. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so sorry. I've lost my voice. So kindly bear with me.
So A Death in Shonagachhi was born of your doctoral research, which focused on establishing connections between private and public spaces and sexual violence against the men. You also spent a lot of time in Shonagachhi documenting the lives of sex workers and their families and talking to like a cross-section of people in Shonagachhi. I wanted to know, at what point did you decide to use all these experiences, research, and insights into into Shonagachhi in a novel?
Yeah, I think we talk a lot about research, academic research that goes into writing a book, nonfiction, obviously, but also a lot while writing fiction. But we don't talk enough about osmosis and experience. When you are among people and you're writing about the same people, then your experience of interacting with those people will by default come into the book. There is no other way, and that is how it should be. So I wouldn't call it research per se. I mean, you could, it's a form of research, but it is it's experience, it's learning by osmosis, it's immersing yourself in a world and then writing about that world, which I think is the most genuine and authentic way of doing it. And I don't think I could have written this novel without A, immersing myself in that world, and B, then channeling that world in the novel. Otherwise, it would have been a very inauthentic novel and not really the genuine article.
And yet you say in interview after interview that you don't have the right to write a book on Shonagachhi, even if it's a fictional treatment, because you have not lived in Shonagachhi, you are not part of Shonagachhi. So I just wanted to understand why this anxiety of appropriation.
Representation is complex, and there is more points of views than just mine. And my novel is not an own voices novel. It's not a story of sex workers by a sex worker. I've never been a sex worker. I've never lived in Shonagachhi. I've never been trafficked into sexual slavery. So in some ways, as an author, as an artist, you do carry the guilt. You have to ask the question, am I the right person to tell this story? And which is why I think my book is not just a story of sex work in Calcutta. It's a story of Calcutta. It's just a story of a community of people, a city. And it's got a lot of voices in that novel. It's not just, to me, there is no one main character, even though there are people whose stories you will be following for the most part in the novel. It's not just the story of one person or two people. And that's the only way I could write it in an authentic way, because I didn't feel that I had the right to represent one person and their consciousness, because I'm not that person. Go ahead.
Given that it's a debut novel,
Yeah.
how easy or difficult was it for you to tell this story from different perspectives, voices, registers, from the perspective of Lali, the NGO workers, from her lover, the unofficial Babu Tilu Shah, and also the police officers? How difficult was it in terms of craft?
Well, I think that's why it took about 7 years.
And you're still making changes in the US edition, so add one more year to that.
This is the 8th year of making change. Last year was the 8th year of making changes. I'm happy to say 2022 is the first year that's free of me working on this novel, which feels like a great achievement. But yeah, it was difficult. And the first draft was primarily the story of Tilu, not so much Tilu, but it was really focused on Lali, the main character. And then the more drafts I did, it was more clear to me that it had to have multiple voices, because that's how we live in India. Like when you go out of your house, you take a bus, and like your story becomes part of other people's stories. The people will bump into you in a bus, you'll have an argument with somebody will crack a joke. At least life in Calcutta, the way I know it, is very polyphonous. You can't have just your own voice. And the other thing I want to say is that Indian regional language literature, and I grew up on Bengali fiction primarily. I write in both languages. I'm a translator from Bengali to English. We are not that focused on this is one person's story. I think that's a different tradition of writing, a more Western tradition of writing, where you have this main character, this main person, and this is the story of that person. But in Indian literatures, I think we have much more polyphonic voices. Our epics are very polyphonic. They have multi voices. And I think that was important for a book that I thought was primarily a portrait of Calcutta, a people, a whole city, and I wanted more voices in it.
So one of the striking things about the novel is the very nuanced and sensitive portrayal of the characters, even the antagonists. So I just wanted to understand how much research went into the writing of the characters, and was there any particular character that was hard to write?
Yeah, I can't say that any research went into writing the characters. Characters were empathetic.
Okay. Are any of the characters based on real life?
Not really, not as a real person, but they're all some kind of a amalgamation of multiple real people that I've met, not necessarily in Shonagachhi, but across life. And some of them are completely made up, you know. I mean, Tilusha is completely made up, but they're all typical of people that I feel that I've met in Kolkata. But yeah, and I wouldn't say that there is any research that went into writing characters. A lot of intuition and empathy and trying to understand characters went into that. I personally don't think characters that are either this or that or very black and white are interesting. I mean, I don't want to read about one-dimensional people. I think people have many more dimensions. And it was fun for me to look at this very corrupt police officer when he goes home. Like, I know he takes bribes at work. I know he's a misogynist. I know he hates social workers. That's all okay. But who is he when he goes home? Like, you know, when he goes home, he puts on some like talcum powder under his armpits. He serves the news channels and he hears his mother yell at his wife. Like, I wanted to catch them after hours and like see what they do when they stop being the types that they are.
I want to talk about the humor in the novel, and it's a very humorous novel, starting from the opening scene to most of the sections involving Tilusha. Uh, how easy or hard was it for you to tap into humor uh, in a setting like Shonagachhi?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that question. I think Indians are funny. We are a very funny people. We find humor everywhere. Um, at least in Kolkata, like, you know, it's like there'll be something happening. A passerby will make a remark, then everybody will start laughing. Somebody else will pick a fight. There's lots of voices. I mean, I think humans in general, find joy wherever we go, everywhere across cultures. And I think Indians have a culture of joking about the many trials and tribulations that we have to go through on a daily basis. And I wanted that to be a part of the novel. When I started out writing, I didn't know many things, but I knew that laughter had to be a part of it, especially because the book was based in Shonagachhi. So I really admire that you asked that question, because I think when you start writing a book about Shonagachhi, about women who have been trafficked into sexual slavery, many of them as children, there is a certain set of expectations. People expect you to write tragedy porn. People expect you to write a very doom and gloom story. It is a doom and gloom story, but it's also a human life, and no human life is devoid of joy or jokes or laughter. People laugh. This is how people live. And I felt that it would be a complete disservice and deeply dishonest to write a book that did not have humor, because the women I met, women, children, shopkeepers, they all laugh. They laugh multiple times a day. They told the best jokes, very unrepeatable, a lot of them, but the best jokes. And I thought that needed to be there. That's where you do the right thing. Not having the joke would be the wrong thing to do.
I wanted to ask you to kind of elaborate on a comment you had made in one of your interviews, that this is an anti-murder mystery, that A Death in Shonagachhi is an anti-murder mystery, despite the fact that the very title sets up an expectation among the reader that is either a mystery or a crime novel. So why do you think it's an anti-murder mystery, and how would you classify like the genre of the novel?
Right, thanks. I think I've always thought that a genre is the narrowest way of looking at a book. Genre is very useful, but a genre doesn't really mean anything. The only thing I would ask myself if I'm reading a book is that, do I like it enough to go on to the next page? That's all that matters. It doesn't really matter what the genre of the book is. But yes, the title definitely sets up that expectation. But once you finish the book, I hope you will see that the title works at many different levels, because the book is really about a death in Shonagachhi or many deaths in Shonagachhi. And yes, I do think that the book is an murder mystery. Let's put it that way. It's an anti-thriller. It's an anti-murder mystery. That's what I thought of it as, and that's because many women in India die, especially marginalized women, especially women who are in sex work or in some way do not hold up to society's standards of what a respectable woman should be. There are many deaths, there are many rapes, there are many things that happen. And a lot of them, or most of them, I want to say, are not solved. There are lots of people that have died that have been on the front page of news or second or fourth or the seventh page in a little column. And nobody asks, well, what happened to that investigation? Did anybody follow up? Who killed them? There's lots of people, we just don't know who killed them. And as citizens, we're very happy to accept that. But as readers, when there's a murder in this fourth page of a novel, we expect that it's going to be solved by the end page. And I felt like, why misrepresent truth? Nothing that I've written in the book, it's all fictionalized, but nothing in the book is something that hasn't happened. Actual in real life, that's not, because I feel that reality, especially reality of women, is bad enough. I didn't need to invent it. Inventing things would be an insult. So if you feel dissatisfied at the end of the novel, I just want you to ask, well, should we then be more dissatisfied as citizens when these murders are not solved?
I wanted to talk to you about the portrayal of the protagonist, Lali. You mentioned that she was a very difficult character to write, and you did not even face issues writing some of the ancillary characters, but it took you the longest time to figure out Lali. Why is that so?
I think the easiest answer is that I'm not Lali. Now, you could say, well, I'm not the other characters as well, but Lali she is a character who's in her mid-30s, who's been trafficked into sexual slavery and as a child. And this is the only life that she knows. So that is a very difficult reality to portray. This book is not a reportage, and though I met many Lalis while working on this book, it's not one person's story, and it wouldn't have been right for it to be. I didn't want to mine someone's personal story, so it really had to be a person as real as a character can be and as authentic as it can be. And I think when you're trying to do an honest job, I don't even want to say a good job, but a morally honest job, where you try to represent a reality as authentically, as genuinely, and as sympathetically and morally responsible way as you can, then I think you have to proceed very cautiously. You have to ask, what am I saying? Does it hold up? Does it have emotional truth? Does it have actual truth? So Lali, being the main character, being a person whose reality is much worse than mine, I had to tread very carefully, and I'm glad that I did. I'm glad that she took time to come out.
How did you go about creating a character like Tilusha?
Tilu Shao is, if you haven't read the book, Tilu Shao is a longtime customer of Lali. He is a writer of erotic fiction. He writes little porn novellas. He's got a sister-in-law.
Series of the novels.
He's written the sister-in-law series, and his best-selling porn novella is called Come Into the Moonlight, Sister-in-Law. So he writes novellas, but his ambition is to write a historical novel about Kolkata and become famous and have a book launch in Oxford Bookstore in Park Street. And he's madly in love with Lali. So that's Tilu Shao. Tilu Shao, ironically, was the easiest character to write. He comes in the first chapter. I started the book by writing about him. I thought it was going to be his book. He was my main character when I started writing. And then Lali just came and she just took over the book. She just hijacked. She was like, no, this is my story. But when I started writing, I was going to be Tilusha because I thought Tilusha was incredibly funny. I find people like that incredibly funny. And I don't always know what a book is going to be or where the character is going to go, but I've got a character and then I just want to keep writing them to see what they do. And he was the easiest to write and the most fun to write.
Tilu aspires to literary stardom, and he intends to do that by writing a historical novel about Calcutta. Not many people know that before starting work on what was going to be A Death in Shonagachchi, Rijula did a draft of a historical novel set in Calcutta. So how much of that got into this novel, into Tilu's character?
Yeah, so you know all the secrets. It was a literary novel with a historian as the main character, a very serious historian who was writing this history of Calcutta. It was supposed to be this very serious, highbrow literary novel, and I really slogged and for that book, and it was so boring. I bored myself to death writing that book, and everybody I showed it to was also equally bored but very polite. So in some ways, I guess Tilu was easy to write because Tilu is a self-parody of me trying to be this highbrow literary writer, because it was my debut and I was like, nahi kuch karke dikhana hai, like, you've got to be like serious. Female writer as well, chip on the shoulder, like can't write about your own life because females only write like thinly veiled autobiographies. So I have to write something like real and like, highbrow. So that's why I think Tilu was so easy because he was a self-parody. He was a parody of me. He was a parody of my
कर ले कनेक्ट कर ले
something you want to do as a writer or sometimes even as a researcher is access these places that are like so that there are these like held back from you, and these don't have any publishers. I mean they're mainly like like they're made by printers who also do like wedding cards
Catalogs
like
of
menus,
escorts,
wedding menus and
yeah,
everything, and yeah.
So one of the striking aspects of the novel is the very vivid descriptions of Calcutta, the streets, North Calcutta, Park Street, Victoria Memorial. And in one of the interviews, you mentioned that the city has played a huge role in in shaping you as a novelist and a writer. So what sort of an impact did Calcutta have on you, and how did it have so much of an impact on you?
We Bengalis are a little bit parochial about Kolkata. Anybody will tell you that we're very very like about Calcutta. But I think artists are always writers. Like we're always in a time lag. Like I can't write about something that's happened this week. I have to process it. It has to percolate. It sort of has to go over a long time for me to be able to write it. So in a way, we're all like living in the past, and especially debut books are sometimes like these things where you like sort of expunge these old ghosts. So this book is in many ways a love letter to Kolkata. I wrote this book almost entirely elsewhere. Actually, not almost entirely elsewhere. It started in UK. I had a first version in Singapore, and the version that you'll read now was written in 2020 in the lockdown in New Zealand. So it's completely been written elsewhere. And I think that's why it is the way it is, because there's so much of my own longing for Kolkata, which I couldn't access at that time, that came out in that book. So there's a lot of love there, which I think has been picked up by a lot of readers. And that's completely me being very sentimental about this place that has shaped my entire artistic lens, because I lived there at a very impressionable age. I constantly walked everywhere in the city for hours. And I think that's just heavily imprinted and adjusted my artistic lens, and that might carry on for a long time.
And you make a very interesting comment in one of your interviews that this is a book about Calcutta and Shonagachhi, and that there can never be one book on Shonagachhi. And why do you think that way?
Because there's no one source of truth. What I could say was my personal experience and my lens and my biases. And, the way I saw this city, not just Shonagachhi, but how Shonagachhi exists in this other very old city as well. This very colonial city, this very parochial city, this very refugee city in some ways. Calcutta, large parts of Calcutta is refugee. Part of my family is refugee. They're literally called X-colony, Y-colony. A lot of Bangladeshis there. So it's a huge, so that was my portrait. And the only thing to say about that is that there's not that many full-length fictional works that are set in Shonagachhi. I personally could not find many when I was trying to look. There's a lot of non-fiction work.
There's one book that was published by Aleph,
Yes.
Jimli
Yes.
Bhattacharya.
Yes. Yeah.
Published.
There's by comparison, there's more non-fiction work, but we haven't explored it in fiction. How we have explored it is in Bollywood. We've always got this trope of this prostitute who comes in. If we look at 70s films, 80s films, there's always, there's a lot of tropes. Shonagachhi often makes, or, Kamathipura or what have you, makes these little, guest appearances in our imagination. And it's depicted exactly as people stereotypically expect it to be portrayed, a certain version, a certain look. And I felt like that was not reflecting the reality of what I saw or the people that I talked to. And I felt that it was important to occupy that space as well. But that's not to say that I wrote this book to represent something or to make any kind of a political claim. I tried to actually write a Bengali book in English, which was my experimentation with form and language. Because I think that what we are doing now is that we can bring our understanding and our learning from Bhasha literature that many of us have grown up in, and we're bilingual and we can read and write in other languages, and bring some of those form and some language capabilities or lenses of seeing the world into writing in English, that we don't have to follow any kind of formula. We can completely make our own grammar of how to write India by Indians, but in English.
Wanted to know how did the novel, especially the plot of the novel, evolve over the last 6 to 8 years? There's a very strong subplot of the demonetization in the novel. And I do know, given the fact that I'm your agent for this edition, that the second half of the book was substantially different from the initial draft. So, what was the earlier drafts like?
Yes, I sold this book to Picado in 2017, and my long-suffering editor, who's sitting right there, is the real hero of the story, who's been very patient and very graceful with me. And when I wrote this book, it was quite different, and because it took a while, there was COVID. I changed and changed and changed the entire story. Times had moved on, and Shonagachhi and sex trade in India is so cash based. I mean, we are such a cash based economy, or used to be, till we have mobile wallets and stuff like that. Just even it's very recent, even like 5-6 years ago, and parts of India are extremely cash based. The entire sex trade is extremely cash based, and the devastation that demonetization caused in sex trade is insane. Like, it was sex workers that I know compared it to the AIDS pandemic. They even said that AIDS was slightly better than, like, no, sorry, they said that about COVID, because AIDS, they could still use a condom and stuff like that. But COVID was like, sorry, I'm mixing it up. But they remember the AIDS bit for how empty the streets were. They were like with demonetization, and people would come. The first few days they did very good trade, because the cooperative bank, the sex workers have a cooperative bank, a school. They have done loads, like every development that's happened in Shonagachhi, all of it has been done by sex workers themselves. They're extremely organized. They're very politically aware. They work for themselves. They have their own. It's very admirable what women and trans people there have achieved. So the cooperative then said that, if you're getting 500 rupee notes, you take it. We'll go to the bank and we'll change it. So the first 2 days they did a very good trade, but then it completely stopped. And and it was just a very surreal experience for them to see this currency that they were waiting on. And it's many layered, because a lot of those people, they don't have sex workers, I mean, they don't have identity cards, so they don't have bank accounts. So it's, they keep cash, but a pimp will come, or a bad customer will come, and they'll get beaten up, and that money gets stolen. So cash is a very important. It's like literally the difference between eating and not eating, or going to the hospital and not going to the hospital. So what demonetization did was absolutely devastating to the sex industry. And just to come back, like the book is that, I mean, if book didn't have demonetization, after it happened, it would just be such an inauthentic portrait of this community. So it was just no way to, it was a dead book, because times had changed. So I had to deal with that. I had to write about that, because it was real and that was important.
What about the plot about the Maharaj that was introduced later on?
Yeah, so the second half of the book is draws heavily on the Raja Ram Rahim incident. And that also, I mean, that is more because I think when I was reading the news when it came, and it just completely shook me. Like, it actually completely shook me. Even though I'd been working on sexual violence and sexual slavery as an academic for a long time, just the fact that there were these underground tunnels where, women were just like kept captive as actual slaves, and people were being killed and their families were being killed. And more so, and that shook me. But also the fact that there was one woman, this Sadhvi, who wrote one letter. That letter went got stuck in the bureaucracy, and one day it reached the chief minister, and then it reached the president, and then this big bad wolf was brought down by the power of one letter, by this one unnamed woman. And my sentimental heart, I was just shook. Like, I just felt like, wow, that's such a powerful thing, of words, of women, of women who've been silenced. That you have to tell your story, and when you tell your story, sometimes something happens. Like this person who's getting people killed, who is so rich, who has got politicians and the entire system in his pocket, they can go down if one unnamed woman tells their story. That just did something to me, because you can imagine researching this world, working in this world is very taxing. It takes a toll on you. It traumatizes you. There's only so much you can read about rapes without it affecting you as a woman. But sometimes things like this, they just like, it had a profound effect on me, and I think that's why it's in the book.
So for all of you who don't know, A Death in Shonagachhi is being made into a limited series by Drishyam Films. So Rijula, how closely are you involved in the writing of the screenplay, and what is the status of the series?
Well, it's still very early days, so and I'm not writing it. I will be consulting on
in the writer's room.
any
Like
questions they might
technical-
have. Yeah, but I won't be writing because I think it's a very different skill set, and that's not a skill set I have. It's very important in life to know your limits, and I will not try to do that. And then primarily, what they do is a different art form. What I am is a novelist and a short fiction writer. What they are filmmakers. And it's very important to respect those boundaries. So they will create their own work of art, and my thing stops with my book.
Rijula, read like a short start. How much time do we have? 10 minutes. So we'll open the floor for questions.
Kanishka wants me to read out a passage, but it's very hot. Nobody likes to hear people read out from a page.
It's a very revealing passage, so just read it out.
I would rather hear people's questions.
Like, we'll have time for questions. Read it out.
Okay, so there's a bit about Samsher Singh, who is the inspector in charge in Burtala station, which is close to Shonagachhi. His interaction with Deepa, who is a person who runs an NGO that works with women in Shonagachhi. Deepa has come to lodge an FIR about the murder of a sex worker. Samsher hid his face in his hands as Balok Ghosh briefed him. He was hoping it would blow over, just like these cases usually did. Shonagachhi had its own way of dispensing justice, and the police seldom needed to get involved, except when people like this woman created a fuss over it. Samsher kneaded his temples with his knuckles. So who is she? He asked his constable. Constable Balok Ghosh looked at a card in his hand and said with contained distaste, Deepa Marhatta sir runs a NGO in South Calcutta, mainly with the collective in Shonagachhi. He lowered his voice as he said the last bit. We told her you're busy, but it's no use. She won't listen. Samsher Singh groaned behind his hand. Balok Ghosh looked at Samsher's bent head. The man was so big, but had the brains of a farm animal, with all the blunt doltishness of a bull. In his considerable experience, Samsher wouldn't go very far. That he was a duty officer was already a miracle. Balok cleared his throat. My advice is to hear her out and do whatever it takes to get her out. These girls are like poison, like syphilis, sir. Hard to shake off. Plus, there's this horde of whores right outside the thana. We have to manage the situation. Arey, madam, come. Please take a seat. Tell me how we can serve you. Hey, Noshkor, bring 2 special cutting chai. Will you take some refreshments, madam? They make very good Moglai parota here. Deepa smiled sweetly at Samsher, disarming him. He had a composite image in his mind of what he thought of as lady social workers. Samsher hated them and would not admit that he was mildly, inchoately afraid of them. Shouty, belligerent, unmarried women of a certain age, who in some way Samsher felt sure were ruining the sacred family and social structure. Who knows why? Maybe because they couldn't get married themselves. A bunch of ugly harpies. But this one, Samsher didn't have a box he could fit her into. He couldn't tell her age. She could be in her late 30s or mid 40s. She looked striking, had a nice smile, and was very clearly a few rungs of social status above him. Her clothes were plain, but Samsher knew that kind of plainness. It sold at a premium in small palm terraced boutiques that displayed their wares on reclaimed antique furniture in old Art Deco houses, shunning anything as crass as a shop. Deepa held up a hand. Please, officer, thanks for the offer, but I'm rather in a hurry and would like to lodge a report, please. I understand these women outside are protesting the fact that you won't file a report for a cognizable offense. Samsher smiled like a man martyred. Madam, you're educated people, cream of society, but we understand things also. Just some phone call telling us unverified information cannot count as grounds for a solid FIR. Na? So I'll just stop there because I'm curious to hear your questions.
Yeah, hi. Hi, ma'am. So first, I want to thank you for this book. Like, there's this thing in this society. Whenever we talk about sex workers or sex, like we just go like everyone just goes silent. They don't want to talk about it. It's not in the mainstream. And why I'm thanking you is that because you've done this great work. And I have read a lot of articles about a death in Shonagachhi. And the point here is that how will we bring this in the mainstream, or how we should talk about it in the mainstream media or in the society.
Thank you for your kind words. It's already in the mainstream. It's already, we've been talking about, we've been seeing images of sex worker where this Bollywood mein sex worker, we're seeing it for decades, it's not a secret. Like everything in India, it's an open secret, like all our families, we have a lot of open secrets in our family. All the things that everybody knows, but you're not allowed to talk about. But everybody knows them. So that's the same as, that's the same as the things. But the only thing you can do about it is actually talk about it. But talk about it, in a way that's realistic, that's honest, that's authentic, that is not playing into some kind of a stereotype, or not some danda to beat women on the head over and over again. It's a fact. It is not all good. It's not all bad. There are good things to it, there are bad things to it, but it's also it's reality. It's the reality of the women who live there. This is what they do. This is how they have brought up families. Many of them have kids who are doctors and engineers today because their mothers do. This is all they could have done. So that's also important to acknowledge.
Thank you, ma'am. So, origination of Shonagachhi, as we readers who have read about Shonagachhi since the early beginning of times, there's two Shonagachhi which lies for all of us. There's Shonagachhi in Bangla, which is the tree of gold. So that's from the perspective of all the women residing there. That's from the perspective of the oldest economic civilizations of our time. And then we have Sonagazi, okay? The one which is represented as the streets of despair. It's considered as the colonies where people are dacoited and where the customs of social civilization are rooted. Okay. And they say the actual idea of Shonagachhi lies somewhere in between. So for you, what is Shonagachhi? The tree of gold or the one that brings fruit to the society? And I know there cannot be exactly in between because we are always biased to one side of it.
Well, it's neither. It's actually the real place called Shonagachhi. It's a bus stop. You can get off. There's four streets that meet there. It's very busy. That's people live there, and not just sex workers. There's a lot of families that live there in the actual families, because it's very expensive for sex workers. But if it's a family, then sometimes you can get very cheap rents. There's a lot of poor people who live there with their kids as well. There are shopkeepers there. There's people who sell dal chawal every day. They make tea. They're not all sex workers. So Shonagachhi, like parts of North Kolkata, is a neighborhood. It is a neighborhood, and it has the rules of neighborhood, except that many people over there have a certain profession. But the Shonagachhi that you see mediated by this fantasy of what a red light district or what a brothel looks like is very determined by Bollywood and our own imagination. But if you actually land up there, it's just congested streets. There's a lot of people you won't be able to point out and say that's a sex worker, that's a sex worker. Not always, people are just people. There is like their nannies there is daddies there's little kids there, shopkeepers there. So for me, it's neither of these representation. It's just the real place that I know, that I've been to. It's very real. It's very congested.
Can take one more question. Yeah, one.
Thank you. So as someone who's writing that involves so much research, and the part that you said in the beginning about, you're not feeling like you've questioning yourself if you're the right person to write like that story. And you've written the story over a lot of places. So what I'm coming to as a question is that, you conduct interviews and you're going there as sometimes, I mean, not you specifically, but if someone's going there as an outsider to interview these people, how do you flow from where you come from? How do you connect with them? How do you relate to them? How do you start putting those questions out there and empathize? I mean, empathy is, again, it's going to be there, it's going to come, but how do you start with your interviews? How do you do that?
It's so if you go just fresh like that in Shonagachhi, you won't get anywhere. You have to go with people there. So the non-governmental organizations run by people who are sex workers and also people who are not sex workers, and some combination of the two, they have done much work over decades. So they have very solid relationships. So you do have to go, because it's a bit, and it's also very invasive, and that's how the way it should be. I won't come up to any of you and ask you your Janam Patri. I think that's your business. So we shouldn't expect to be able to do that just because of somebody's profession. We shouldn't go and say, "Ab tumhari kahani batao," because I can cry about it and feel better about myself, right? So that's not the right thing to do. So you have to build these relationships. I mean, if you want the privilege of listening to somebody's story, then you better do the hard work of actually humbling yourself and developing that relationship so you are worthy of getting that story. It's not a privilege. You work for it. Thanks. So if we can't answer anybody's questions, I just want to say that I would love to talk to you all. So please come up later on. And if you have any questions, please talk. It's the best part is actually talking to you. So that would be lovely.
We'd also like to thank our sponsor, Amar Ujala. Both of them will be signing their books by the book signing area on your left. Thank you very much, Kanishka and Rijula Das. We'd also like to thank Amar Ujala for the session. And both of them will be signing their books, which is on your right and on our left. So grab your copies and they'll be right there. Thank you.
Thank you.